Hello, I'm Judy Stiles. Thank you for joining us this week on Newsmakers. Well, Jefferson City's back to business with the state legislature back at work, and the governor has spoken. And today on Newsmakers, we're going to take a look at what's been done already, but look ahead for what's coming up in this legislative session. Joining me, Charlie Davis, our state representative from District 162. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for letting me be here, Judy.
We're recording this program just a few days after the governor came in with his State of the State, I guess the official message to the legislature.
A very interesting State of the State address, and what was very disheartening is the attendance. You know, he requested 160 tickets, which is about 4 times as many as he normally gets, yet the galleries were pretty much empty. And that was something that was kind of a shocking situation, because it's usually full. A lot of people are really energized, excited about it. And I don't know if it's because he's a lamed up governor. He's going to be done at the end of this year.
This was his last time to do this?
This is his last time, and he's not going to be able to run for governor again, and maybe the enthusiasm just wasn't there. But we listened to what he said, and some of the things that he said we agreed with, but there were a lot of things that he said that a vast majority of the Missouri House didn't necessarily agree with.
And of course, that's the time when he presents his dreams, his new programs perhaps. Now you as legislators have to go back and say, where's the money to do these things?
Absolutely. And the way that the budget process works is in December, the Senate, the House, the budget staff from the governor's office, as well as economists, usually from the University of Missouri, as well as other economists, get together and they project what they believe that the revenue is going to be for the next year, and that's called the consensus revenue estimate. And then we build and base our budget based on that number. What the legislature does typically every year is we try to aim low, so that way if revenue comes in higher than expected, we're okay. But the executive branch has a tendency of aiming way high, and then when the revenue doesn't come in, it's up to him to cut from wherever he wants. And I personally would rather aim low, so that way we're on target, and if we do have extra money come in, then we can appropriate some of those monies to some of the programs that are important.
So it's kind of a fine balance. You're in January, you have to say, we're hoping we get this much money. In May, when we actually finalize the budget, we're going to have a better feel of what's coming up.
Absolutely, and for example, the governor last year wanted to have a 5.6% budget increase. We compromised at a 3.6, and currently we're under 2.8. So if we would have done that 5.6% increase and done a budget based on that, we would have had to cut about 3% from our general revenue expenditures because we estimated way too high. I'd rather be more physically conservative than flippant about where the money's really going to come from and how much we think is going to come in.
It hurts a lot more than in your perspective later to go back and cut things that you may have promised people.
Absolutely. You know, when Missouri Southern banks on building a building and we promise that we're going to have this money available, and all of a sudden that money's cut, it hurts, because there's a lot of times that some of these programs, some of these monies are actually used, and then all of a sudden the rest of it goes away, and then what do they do?
How do you finish what you started?
Absolutely. It's very difficult to stop midstream.
We mentioned the governor's last term. You still have the situation in Jefferson City, a Republican legislature, Democratic governor. We've seen that over the last few years. How do you feel the communication maybe between the legislature and the governor in this election type year?
This is my 6th year in the Missouri House, and it's the 6th year that so far the governor has not come and really addressed the legislature. And to me, that's frustrating. I try to visit with my constituents on a daily basis. I get calls, emails, text messages, face-to-face conversations with my constituents, so I know exactly where they are, where they feel about certain issues, and what we can do to better their lives. And I believe that it should be the same way with the governor. The governor should come talk to the legislature, but unfortunately he doesn't. 6 years in a row has not come talk to us, given his priorities. We've basically had to listen to the State of the State address and then base what we think can be accomplished on that address, which, like you said, has been usually pipe dreams and it's a best case scenario. So I hope that this year, being his last year in the Missouri House, he'll come talk to us, so that way we can build a relationship and we can actually get some of the things that we can both compromise on and get accomplished this year for our people. So
talking together is a first step.
Absolutely, it is. It is.
Now, election year, impact on the legislature for this year? I mean, you've got a lot of people up for election.
We do. As a matter of fact, every state representative is up for re-election. We have 163 across the state of Missouri, and half the Senate, which is 17. And then, of course, all of our statewide offices,
Right.
whether it's governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, secretary of state, auditor, and treasurer. I think I got them all. Everybody's up for re-election, plus all of our congressional delegation. Of course,
Right.
our congressman is Billy Long in Southwest Missouri, and half of the senators, and Roy Blunt is up for re-election this year too, as well as the presidency. So it is a very, very big year. When our constituents go to the ballot box come August and November, they're going to be very shocked at how long it's going to be, because there's going to be so much information and so many choices on the ballot that hopefully people kind of research it before they get to the ballot box and kind of know what they're going to do before they get there.
So informed voters should start listening now, paying attention. to what they're doing.
Absolutely. Let's start listening now and form your opinion. And I think our founding fathers wanted us to have an educated electorate. You know, there's nothing worse than going into a ballot box and I don't know any of them, and they just choose a name that they have heard in the past, or a writing candidate writes somebody's name in, or Mickey Mouse. And that's one of the things we've seen over the last few years. There's been a lot of Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck candidates that were write-ins. And, you know, that's, I think, shows that we don't have, I won't say that we're an uneducated electorate. We have an electorate that sometimes doesn't get informed. And I think sometimes it's up to our colleges, our universities, myself, as well as the media to make sure that we educate people. And we don't have to editorialize everything. I don't have to give my opinion, but I think it's my responsibility to let people know who's running and what's going to be on the ballot.
These are the issues you're being asked to discuss.
Absolutely.
And so forth. Well, we're talking about voting, and I know one of the things that we've heard in the early days of the legislature already is voter ID concerns. That's something that
yes.
came up in the past, and it sounds like it's once again this year.
It's come up again, and the reason we're doing this is we actually passed voter identification requirements in years past. The Supreme Court declared it unconstitutional because we did not have a constitutional provision to do it. So what we've done this year is we complied with the Supreme Court's decision. We passed two bills in the House. It's on its way to the Senate. The first one is a constitutional measure which authorizes it, and then the second one is the statutorial change which creates the mechanism by which we actually have voter ID. And all it says is that in order to go vote in the state of Missouri, you have to have a state-issued ID. And if you don't have a state-issued ID, no worries, the state of Missouri will pay for it. And to me, as a second-generation German immigrant, my mother was a first-generation German immigrant, came to the United States in the late 50s after World War II, after she married my Army father. And she came to this country and became a U.S. citizen, and she would sit in front of the TV and watch Roger Staubach and the Dallas Cowboys play, and she just grew to love this country. And if she were alive today, she would tell you, because my dad tells me how she felt about voting and things of that nature, how important it was. And we do see a large number of immigrants coming across our southern and northern borders, some legally and some illegally. And then we're also having hundreds of thousands being flown here from parts of the Middle East that are not U.S. citizens, and those individuals constitutionally do not have the authority to vote. But they can go get a driver's license, because you can drive and not be here legally, which is another conversation for another day.
Topic.
But to have the certainty and to ensure the integrity of our election system, to me, is paramount. We have men and women serving in our military overseas to fight and protect the freedoms and liberties this nation has been so blessed with. And if we don't have that integrity, then it's pretty much a sham. And all this does is make sure that we have the ability that if you're a Missouri citizen, come to vote, show us your ID, so that way we can make sure that everybody is eligible.
Yeah, so this will then, being a constitutional amendment, will go to the vote of the people. It'll be
Correct.
on the ballot. If
it will be on the ballot. I'm not sure if it's going to be the August or the November ballot, but it will be on the ballot. And if that passes, then the second portion automatically will go into play.
We're tied together for that.
That's correct.
Okay, so the House has passed it. It's on its way to the Senate.
Yes.
Then obviously, like all bills, will go to the governor.
Governor, anything that is a HJR, a joint resolution, does not have to go to the governor. So if it goes on the ballot, the House passes it, Senate passes it, then it goes to the vote of the people.
Okay.
The statutorial change will go to the governor for his approval or disapproval. But if we look at the numbers that we passed that bill in the House just this last week, it is a veto-proof majority.
So you can take that and go from there.
Sure.
Well, speaking of IDs, we've also heard of something called Real ID. And some people are saying, well, isn't that something to do with driver's licenses as well? So explain what that means and how Missouri is looking at that.
After 9/11 happened, we started to think about the security of our country. So the legislature in Washington come up with this idea of a Real ID, which, if you want to think of it as a better way, it's a national identification card, because that's really what it is. Okay. Constitutionally, the driver's license are done by the states, and we have compacts that every other state agrees to accept the driver's license from the others. Driver's license is not a federal issue. It was never meant to be, and constitutionally it is a state issue. Well, the federal government decided that they were going to create a national database, and it was going to be done through the driver's license. So the Real ID Act put into place some provisions that I have absolutely no problems with. But it put into provision some things that I do have some various concerns about.
Okay.
And there's two provisions that the vast majority of my constituents have called me and have concerns about. Number one is creating a database of every Missouri driver, height, weight, age, all the information that is on your driver's license, social security number, etc. And the other provision that I have real grave concerns about is biometric data. You will be going to the driver's license office. You'll be having your picture taken with a special camera that does the biometric features of your face, and that information goes into a database. The distance between your pupils, your nostrils, your mouth, your ears, etc.
Identify someone specifically.
And if you've ever seen the number of cameras that are in England you can actually take somebody's photo, put it in the database, and as soon as they walk outside, they can tell you where that person is.
Because of all the cameras for security.
Because of all the cameras that are in that country. Which sounds good, because if you're looking for a terrorist, well, we can find them. Except, why don't we just put the terrorists on that database and on that list and in that realm, rather than all of the constitutional law-abiding citizens of our state. And that was the provision that in 2009, before I got to the Missouri House, they chose that they were not going to allow to be done in the state of Missouri.
So the lawmakers had a choice back then and said, no, we're not.
Lawmakers had a choice. So we have the opportunity to do three things. We do nothing, and it's not just Missouri alone. There's 27 states that said, we're not going to comply with the Real ID Act. And one of those states is California, one of the largest states in our union. So 27 states that said we have grave concerns, we're not going to do it. So we can stand firm and say, federal government, we're not going to do it. Number two, we can capitulate and we can say, fine, we're going to do whatever you say. Or number three, which is something I think we need to do, is we need to compromise. I believe the federal government would say, okay, we do understand some of the grave concerns that our lawmakers in our states have. So let's do this. Let's create the Real ID. Let's create the driver's license, require proof of citizenship, birth certificate, those other things. But let's not do the biometric data. That, I think, to me, that's a good compromise. We agree with everything, but let's not do it where they can track you no matter where you're at in the country. And I think that's where we need to go, do a little bit of a compromise, and the federal government is going to have to make that decision if they will do that.
So you need that dialogue between states and the federal government.
Absolutely, and hopefully we did meet with one of our senators about a week and a half ago or so, and gave him our opinion, and he was going to take it to Washington and see exactly what they could come up with. So the dialogue
has to start between the different levels of government to make those sort of things happen and so forth. Well, another item I remember hearing the first couple of weeks is carryover from the end of last session, dealing with ethics. The House and the Senate, both talking about ethics in Jefferson City and actually putting some things into motion this year.
Sure. There were two things that we did already this year. Number one is all lawmakers, all staff, all interns have to go through sexual harassment training. We need to make sure that whether you're an intern, whether you're a legislative assistant, or whether you're a state representative or just an employee of the House, that you can be assured that when you go to the Capitol, you're there to do the people's business, you're there to do a job, and you have the protections against harassment that somebody might have a problem with, which I believe everybody does. So we went through the training. We learned what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, and then we also learned about an ombudsman that was created, so that way if somebody has an issue with something that they believe could be harassment, they can go to that individual without fear of retaliation or retribution to get that addressed. And then the other part is actually the ethics part, dealing with whether there's a perceived problem or a real problem. with what happens in Jefferson City, we do need to make sure that we rebuild that trust between our constituents and the elected officials. I don't think anybody elects us to go there and expect us to use our position for personal gain. And the ethics bills that we have worked on so far this year specifically does that. We get rid of the revolving door, meaning if you're an elected official, when you're done being an elected official, you have to wait 1 year after your term before you can become a lobbyist. And one of the things that happened to the Republican Party last year is we had a representative was reelected in November, decided that he was going to resign his position in November and immediately become a lobbyist.
So there's no blockage between that distinction between...
That's correct. So what this bill would do, and if it goes into law, would do is he could not be a lobbyist for 1 year after his term would have expired, which would have been 3 years. And I think that's good. I don't think anybody should be able to use their position as a state representative or senator to further their themselves personally as far as lobbyist or being appointed to positions from the governor, etc. And this has to do with building the trust between the people of the state of Missouri and their elected officials.
Do you find that constituents sometimes just have questions about, the roles of lobbyists, that,
Sure.
That they know that obviously we have elected officials, but, how many lobbyists are there actually in Jefferson City?
Lobbyists have got a bad rap sometimes because the University of Missouri, Missouri Southern State University, all of our colleges, universities have lobbyists. And what those lobbyists do, and they come to our offices and give their point of view.
Right.
Unfortunately, there are some times that lobbyists will purchase airline tickets, vacation tickets,
So this is when
Super
we hear
Bowl
those
tickets.
gifts to lawmakers.
These are those gifts to lawmakers, and that's where I think we break down the trust between the elected officials and the constituents. And that's where we need to nip it in the bud. We need to make sure that we don't have those kind of gifts. We see that in Washington on a daily basis, that most of the people don't feel that they can trust our elected officials on the federal level. Most people feel that they can trust their representatives and senators in Jefferson City, but there are still some issues that needed to be addressed, and that's one of the first and the priority of our Speaker of the House, Todd Richardson, and our very own President Pro Tem of the Senate, Senator Richard. They made an agreement that this is going to be the first thing that we worked on, and 4 of the series of bills have already made it through the House and are on their way to the Senate.
So these are going to be some quick acting measures that people will be hearing about and tying all that together. A lot of talk this time of year, things that are still up and coming, possibilities. Discussion of transportation, for instance. I've heard the Missouri Department of Transportation saying we need more money, we can't fix the roads, or we don't have money to even maintain the roads.
Yes, MoDOT has come to us and come to our constituents and said we need more money. And I believe this. 10 years ago, from what I understand, they had a budget of a little over $1 billion. Today, they have a budget over $2 billion. Number one, before we go to the citizens and ask them for 1 penny more in any tax revenue, a tax increase, we need to make sure that government is spending taxpayer money wisely. I believe all programs, all departments should audit themselves and make sure that if there's a way that we could cut government, make the size of the government smaller before we do any type of tax increase, that should be done first. If we cut ourselves to the bone and there's no alternative, then let's go to the vote of the people. And I believe the people should make that decision if they're going to want to raise the taxes on themselves. Just like there's going to be in April a tax thing on our ballot in Jasper County that is going to go for certain things dealing with Jasper County, and that is the juvenile detention center. And that's the people choosing if they want to do it. And I believe that is where we need to be, is we need to let the people make that choice. I don't think we're in dire straits as some people are claiming. We do have some bridges that are in need of repair. We do have some roads that are in need of repair. But the federal tax, the match dollars that Missouri is required to pay to the federal government for them to match it, we're good until 2018. So it's not an immediate necessity to do. And especially in an election year, for legislators to raise anybody's taxes, even if it's $0.015 per gallon, I think it's political suicide, because you do not raise taxes in an election year.
People are going to say no new taxes.
No new taxes, absolutely. We've heard that before, and we heard and seen where government goes back on what their promises are, and I don't think we should ever do that. We make a promise not to raise taxes without people's input, I think we need to adhere to that promise.
So you see, if anything comes out of this, it'll probably be something on an election, November or sometime later, to ask people, the voters,
That would always be my desire. I think the people themselves should be the ones to choose if they want to do it. And if the people choose no, and our roads deteriorate a little bit, then we have to make sure that we all understand we chose not to. It's just like with us personally. We do a budget, and if we choose not to spend money on something, then we have to understand that down the road we might have to spend a little bit more for that.
If we don't fix the roof this year, someday
we might have to fix the roof and the floor next year. Absolutely.
And tying that
That's right.
together. Well, of course, we're at Missouri Southern State University while we're recording this program, and higher education funding is a big concern.
It is.
I know the representatives from the university have already talked to representatives in Jefferson City. So what is the feeling about higher education? The governor came out and made some statements.
He did, and Missouri Southern has got some great people that are in charge of this university. You know, Alan Marble, I think that was a wise choice from the Board of Governors to choose him. He is very, very involved in not only Missouri Southern, but also with us, making sure we understand what Missouri Southern needs, what the pulse and the heart of Missouri Southern, not only the faculty and the administration, but the students also. And the governor did have some pipe dreams. You know, he talked about all these millions and millions more dollars that we're going to give to higher education. And absolutely, we need to have our students educated, whether it is at a 4-year liberal arts university or whether it's at a 2-year trade school. Right. Because we do need some trades. We do need some 2-year nursing programs. We need welders. We need some of these other trade schools to educate some of our kids. But there's also a time when we need liberal arts degrees. We need these 4-year universities to do a little bit more of the educational process. So we do need to make sure that we provide a quality education, college education to the citizens of our state. And I know we're going to have an increase in funding for our universities this year. Now it's just a matter of compromising, finding out what revenue comes in and how much we're going to be able to give to our universities. I believe we're going to have an increase in the core funding. And I support an increase in the core funding. From Missouri Southern, you know, we've got the talk about a dental school being here, and we're working really hard to make sure that we can appropriate the amount of money that is needed, not only as a one-time appropriation expenditure for building the facility, but then an ongoing year-to-year appropriation for the ongoing requirements, financial requirements that's needed for that. So I think it is going to be a good year for education, not just for Missouri Southern, but statewide.
Of course, higher education being one aspect of education, we also have elementary and secondary, and we've heard a lot over the years about funding formulas and, you know, money for school districts. What about the lower, younger ages of education?
I believe that we need to educate our kids, and it is very difficult. My father was a teacher for many years, and I hear some of the stories. It's very difficult to educate the K-12 kids, especially in larger school districts. We do a good job in Southwest Missouri. Unfortunately, I don't know if we do a good enough of a job, and it's not necessarily the fault of our schools. Sometimes it's the bureaucracy. It's Washington telling our schools, this is what we demand of you. And they try to do a cookie cutter, one-size-fits-all program for all of our schools, and unfortunately that doesn't work. When you have smaller school districts in Lamar, that the vast majority of the kids come from farming families, why do we not gear math towards farming, gear math towards the things that the children understand and know, rather than, again, the cookie cutter, one-size-fits-all? I believe in local control, allowing our school districts themselves choose the curriculum and choose the best way to educate the kids. They know best how to educate the kids in our local school districts, better than we know in Jefferson City, and definitely better than what happens at the Department of Education in Washington, D.C. So we need to make sure that we provide the funding that our schools need. Granted, the funding formula is not fully funded, but we all remember what happened in 2008 when the stock market, the tech bubble, the real estate market collapsed. We all suffered. Our income as individuals suffered, and so did our K-12 schools. So we have been making up ground a little bit at a time, a few $1 million every year. So we aren't up to the level that we had committed, but we are much better this year than we were last year, and we are going to be much better next year than we were.
Trying to take those steps as you
Absolutely.
can.
And there's going to come a point where we're going to have to rework the formula. The formula and the way that it's written now, it is impossible to fund it. So we have people that are in the education department actually looking at how to rework the foundation formula, so that way we can make sure all of our K-12 schools get adequate funding and get the tools that they need to truly educate our kids. So that way, when they come to Missouri Southern, they don't have to go through all these remedial classes.
They're ready to go.
And if you look at the remedial classes that all of our higher institutions of learning have to have just to get those seniors up to where they need to be, it's kind of devastating. It's staggering, the numbers. So we need to work a little bit harder to make sure that those kids that graduate from high school are ready for college.
So continuing the dialogue and continuing work in that
Sure.
area. Right. Well, speaking of dialogue, I know you mentioned people like to get in touch with you. What are some ways they can reach you?
Well, of course, the Missouri House of Representatives got an awesome website. It's house.mo.gov. You can go to the website and you can go look at your state representative, whether it's myself or Representative Bill White, Bill Lance, Bill Rybel, Mike Kelly, and Tom Flanagan down here in
All over
Southwest
this region,
Missouri,
right?
all around here. You can contact us at our office in Jefferson City. You know, my cell phone number, I have no problems giving it out, 417-825-1193. My cell phone number is on all of my state cards,
Okay.
because what is my title?
You're the state
Representative. How can I represent the people if they can't contact me? So whether it's the charliedavis.us website, the Missouri House website, or contact me personally, always love to contact and talk to anybody. Doesn't matter party affiliation, doesn't matter even by district. We all help each other in the Missouri House. So always contact us, because we would love to contact and get in touch with you.
Of course, as a state representative, you're in Jefferson City only 4 days or so a week. Then you're back home to visit with these constituents and see what's happening.
January through May, we have the opportunity to come home Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, even though I have a tendency of leaving after church Sunday, getting up to the Capitol.
Get ready for Monday.
Get ready for Monday, and my Fridays are taken up. You know, most of our legislators have jobs, have
Right.
businesses, so I spend Fridays doing interviews, talking with constituents, and going to my business. And hopefully all of my employees have done a good job of keeping the business going throughout the week, and they do.
Well, I appreciate you coming in on your Friday for this interview today and allowing a chance to share with the viewers. who are
Absolutely,
watching this
always
week.
glad to be here.
Well, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank you, the viewers, for joining us this week. I'm Judy Stiles. Hope you can join me again next week at the same time on this station. We'll see you then.